everyone. Buenas tardes. I've never done this before, and I'm very nervous, so bear with me. My story is about my family, and before I start, I would be remiss if I didn't shout out my cousins, Valeria Sandoval and Barbara Cerda, who own La Revo Books, a Latina-owned bookstore in Milwaukee. So if you haven't checked them out, please do so. A couple of chingonas. Also, can I swear? Okay, excellent. Perfecto. My grandmother's name was Delia Hernandez, but she was born Delia Sandoval because both of her parents' last names were Sandoval, and in Mexico we say fuck the patriarchy, and we give our kids both their moms and dads' names. So she was Delia Sandoval, and she got married. Her name was Delia Hernandez, and she was my best friend. She would take me, her only grandchild at the time, everywhere and anywhere I wanted. She would even take me on the bumper cars at the carnival, where I accidentally cracked a rib, and she had to wear a neck brace for a while, and then she took me back the next year because she just loved me that much. She was effortlessly cool. She would go dancing with my grandfather every Sunday in downtown Mérida, and they would dress to impress. They would be matching from my grandfather's hat all the way down to their shoes, and all the other old people at the dance would be very jealous, and it was great to see. My grandmother was intentionally and unintentionally funny all the time. She used to dance around the kitchen while she cooked, and she would whistle to the music that she was listening to, but she would whistle like this. Because she couldn't whistle. She had the strangest beliefs, like she would yell at us not to sit on cold cement because se te cae la matriz, which if you don't speak Spanish means your uterus will fall out. And she was horrible with names. Like we were watching a movie and she was like, look at, ahí está la Goldie Whoopberg. And she was a smoker almost her whole life, so when she would call us to talk on the phone and we would make her laugh, she would laugh like this. Let's see if I can get it right. She would go, you hear the wheeze? Yeah, that's the wheeze we would get. And she would make up her own words in English and in Spanish. And it was funny, unless you were a little kid like me, who was learning how to speak Spanish through conversation with her family and didn't know what was actual Spanish and what was just huela-ish. And that is important to the story later, so remember that. So when I was about 4 years old, my grandparents moved from Milwaukee to Mérida for my grandmother's job. And they moved into a neighborhood. They built a house in a poorer neighborhood. The company that my grandmother was working for helped find the land for them and help build the house, and they wanted to find a place that was cheap. And so they had this big, beautiful 2-story house in the middle of a poor neighborhood. And so our neighbors were not as fortunate as we were. But my grandparents were super engaged with the community. They would host a party every year and invite over all the neighbors. I played with all the kids. On super hot days, I would invite them to come play in the garden. My grandfather would turn on all the sprinklers and we'd just run around in the water. And sometimes when my grandparents and I would go out to dinner, we would pick up extra food for some of the neighbors. And there was one family in particular that lived across the street from us. It was a big family with a lot of kids. They were all my friends. And sometimes we'd go out to dinner and bring back a meal for them. Before I continue the rest of the story, does anyone know the word for chicken in Spanish? Pollo. Okay, you all know it. Great. That's also important for later. Okay, so my grandparents and I went out one night. We went out to eat, and we got food for the neighbors. And so when we came back, I was feeling really confident in my Spanish. And I was like, you know what? I'll take it over to the neighbors. I'll give it to the kids. They're going to be so, grateful. And like, I want to, they're my friends. Like, I'm going to do this. And my grandmother was like, okay. And she went with me. She was following behind, but I took the lead. And so I went over there and I handed it to the kids. And I was like, here you go. And they're like, ¿Qué es? What is it? And I was like, es chickenuda. And the looks on their faces because that's not the word for chicken in Spanish, right? And my grandmother was like, "Ay, que es pollo?" And I was very embarrassed. But to this day, my family still says chickenuda for chicken. That's huela-ish. So my grandmother died when I was 14 years old. She died less than a year before my quinceañera, which she very painstakingly planned for me. So it was a bittersweet day for my family. And I have, of course, incredible memories of her, some of just a tiny number that I shared with you tonight. But I never got a chance to learn her cooking. So if any of you here have your abuela's recipe for albóndigas, hit me up after the show. Thank you.